Russia and Ukraine could have conducted a long war. They're ready for the long war in many respects. They don't particularly want that. They'd actually like the war to end for different reasons. And I think they were just waiting for the US elections to get out of the way to sit down and negotiate. Um, I think the assumption was that a deal was there to be done in reality. A deal, in my mind, where probably de facto the lines stay where they are. Ukraine doesn't accept the loss of those territories, but there's some negotiation process, long term or future over their future kind of basis, and that, and security guarantees and all those kind of things. Well, no NATO, I think that's kind of clear. Um, no bilateral security guarantees, but sufficient security guarantees to the Ukrainians that they could defend themselves, right? And I think that was kind of doable for both sides. Interestingly, Trump went into the negotiations with a really strong negotiating position, given the two sides wanted to talk. And in terms of the leverage he had over President Putin, he could have increased military support to Ukraine. He could have increased sanctions. He had lots of things to negotiate around: NATO membership, bilateral security guarantees, sanctions, moderation, where about territory. And unfortunately, what happened is Trump gave them all away right at the start, and his team did. They said no NATO, no bilateral security guarantees. In fact, no security guarantees from the Americans at all, not even for this reassurance force from the Europeans. He also said, I mean, we saw with Steve Witkoff, essentially accepting the Russian narrative around the 5 regions in essence. So they gave the territory away. So the Russians, from the Russian perspective, it's, we've got this really weak negotiator, Trump. He's given us everything. We can get more if we play tough. So the Russians, who are willing to kind of deal, suddenly see a very weak negotiating Trump and think, well, let's play hard to get, and we can get everything we wanted right from the start. And from the Ukrainian position, also, they see this negotiation as getting them nothing, and they're very nervous about that. No NATO, no security. I mean, Ukraine would, I think, offer or agree to something on the territorial side if they had some security guarantee for the rest of the territory remaining within Ukraine's remit, but the fact is none of that's on the table. Politically, it's suicide for Zelensky to accept what is currently been suggested, I think, by the Russians and the Americans. So the Ukrainian response also is, we don't like this deal. There's no way we can accept it, but we're vulnerable because, as was seen in the Oval Office, in the short term, they need continued supply of U.S. military kits and intelligence, so that they're going along with negotiations and trying to string the Americans on along as well, to ensure the continued supply of the military kit, to build up their defenses as much as possible, to the point at which they know they're going to have to walk away from negotiations because the deal that's on the table is just not doable from a Ukrainian perspective. So kind of both sides have moved away from each other. And I guess they've recognized also the Trump administration doesn't really know what it's doing on this negotiation, right? And we saw that with Steve Witkoff, right, in terms of his commentary with Tucker Carlson.
I mean, when Donald Trump conducted the initial peace talks with Vladimir Putin, he talked of an immediate ceasefire, and he could have used the leverage, as you say, on both sides. He could have slapped sanctions on Russia, increased military aid to Ukraine, make it happen, as you say. I mean, why did he do exactly the opposite by stopping aid to Ukraine, albeit for a short period, and then now considering lifting sanctions on Russia?
Look, I think we have to kind of realize, what is Trump's motivation, right? Trump, wants to deal with the Russians at all cost. I mean, he seems to. It's interesting. Fiona Hill, British, former Europe head of the National Security Council, she says that Trump only ever asked her 2 questions when she was in his administration for 2 years. The question is, what is Putin like as a person, and will he like me? This was before they went into the Helsinki summit. So Trump's desperate to be liked by Putin. He wants the big deal. Perhaps it's about this reverse Nixonian in terms of the US allying with Russia against China for this sort of future hegemonic battle. But I think, the way Trump thinks of it is Ukraine's kind of expendable. He can bully Ukraine. He doesn't feel able to bully Putin, even though he has all the leverage, as I mentioned at the start. He can increase sanctions. He can increase military support to the Ukrainians, which would hurt the Russians. But he just seems unwilling to do it. And that's the reality. The problem for Ukraine is um, that this negotiating team with Trump is not looking after Ukrainian or European interests at all. That's the reality. Ukraine and Europe are expendable for this Trump administration.
And Timothy, I just want to bring to your attention a news line that is actually coming out now as we're talking on Thursday afternoon. It is that President Macron of France is saying that they're going to send teams to Ukraine to set up a reassurance force, which will be different to a peacekeeping force. That sounds like it's quite an interesting development. How would that pan out, do you think?
Well, I mean, this idea of a reassurance force. I mean, I think there's some reality checks for Europe. I mean, the fact that the Americans have not been willing to provide the backstop. We've seen, and the reality that European countries simply, without the Turks, I should say, Europe without the Turks lack the sheer number of soldiers to police a ceasefire. I think it will be difficult to get boots on the ground of the force of, you need 50,000 plus, I would imagine, to field an effective ceasefire. So let's talk about this reassurance force, which is basically using air and naval assets, air defense, airstrike capability. I mean, we have that in Europe. I mean, we have the ability to. So I guess the European idea now is that you leverage off the Ukrainian strengths, in that Ukraine has 800,000 to 1 million troops on the ground. They've proven able to stop the Russian army. We can use our strengths in our airstrike capability and air defense to help support the Ukrainians if Russia goes in again, right? I mean, we have significant amounts of aircraft, etc. in Europe. We can do a job there. So I guess that's what they're thinking about. It will be interesting how Putin reacts to this suggestion of, I guess, French and other European allies putting troops on the ground to I guess check the reality on the ground and
Yeah, it's exactly that. Because as you're even talking now, Tim, there's stuff coming in, a bit more information. So I mean, it's going to be more clear, I think, probably in the coming hours. But it looks like that they're sending sort of just research teams in to see how this would work. They'll be sent to strategic areas behind the lines. There wouldn't be peacekeeping forces at the moment, but they would be literally teams to look at the different options. And Moscow's already saying that this is risking a clash with NATO. I suppose you'd expect them to say that kind of thing, wouldn't you?
well, I mean, the question for Putin would be, would he be willing to hit those European troops? Fact finding in Ukraine. I mean, we've seen plenty of Europeans and Western allies making the trip to Kiev. I mean, how many European politicians have taken the train journey to Kiev? No one has been injured. I mean, interesting. The Czech president was in Odessa recently, and left Odessa hours after Russian missile strikes. I mean, imagine if a Czech president had been killed in one of those missile strikes, or any European politician. It hasn't happened so far. We have seen obviously some European combatants in Ukrainian military divisions or whatever, military deployment, whatever, killed, but we haven't seen actual Western troops killed in Ukraine. So, what will Putin do to this? Right, we'll wait and see. And how will the West respond if French or British troops get killed in Russian missile strikes on Ukraine as a result of this? Interesting times.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. If you'd like to know more about the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe and sign up for a membership. You can also get more analysis by listening to Times Radio or read thetimes.com. But for now, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.